Okay, so we're going to look at cell theory a little bit. I'm going to get you guys to watch a TED Ed video that talks about the history of a cell and how we have come to understand what they look like and how they function and how they replicate today. And there's also an Amoeba Sisters video that talks about the structures of the cell that I would like you guys to watch. So, everything around us that is considered living is made up of cells, so one or more cells. A cell is the basic unit of life. And so arguably everything around us has all derived or come from a single cell that started replicating and evolving and adapting to its environment. In order for something to be considered alive or living in biology, there are some characteristics that it has to meet, or some rules that it has to meet. So it has to be made up of cells, and those cells need to require energy in some way, shape, or form. So they need energy they need food, they're moving in some sense, they're growing and developing, and they're responding to the environment. So they could possibly adapt to their environment, or at least have some type of response to a stimulus in their environment. They have to be able to reproduce. And in grade 9, you guys would have learned a bunch about different types of reproduction, like asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction, like budding and binary fission. And so all those are types of reproduction. And again, I mentioned that they need to be able to adapt to the environment. So all these 6 characteristics need to be met in order for us to consider something to be alive or living. And this is really different and kind of unique because when we talk about viruses, viruses, an example being COVID, and looking at the flu, it's a virus, or looking at HIV/AIDS, that's another virus, or HPV 1 or 2 herpes. Those are all viruses, and so they're not alive. And the reason they're not considered living is because they cannot reproduce on their own. So they can adapt to their environment and they change. And that's why coming up with a vaccine for the yearly flu is such a challenge, because the virus that we're trying to vaccinate for is always changing and adapting to its environment. But the reason it's not considered alive is because it actually can't reproduce on its own. And the way it reproduces is by finding a host, by finding a living cell. And so by finding that living cell, it'll actually splice or provide some of its DNA into that living cell. And when the living cell reproduces or ruptures, or what we call lysis, it'll actually then distribute that virus and create more of it. So viruses need hosts. They need living cells in order to reproduce. They can't do it on their own. And if you look at images of a virus, they actually, again, look very futuristic and sci-fi and don't look real. And there is a video, if I scroll down here, that I am going to get you guys to watch. The Amoeba Sisters compare viruses and bacteria. And so viruses here, you can see they kind of have what we call a capsid or a capsule, a head, and this is where their DNA would be, and then a tail. And they'll actually just attach themselves to a host. Whereas bacteria, those are living cells. And so we can actually kill bacteria with antibiotics. And so a common one is streptococcus, so having strep throat. Strep throat is a bacteria, and so you would take penicillin, which is an antibiotic, and what it does is, when we talk about the structures of the cell, there's a cell membrane. It's the outer part of the cell. And antibiotics come along and they break that membrane. They break the exterior of the cell. So all its guts fall out and it breaks open and it dies. So there are going to be a couple other videos that I'd like you to watch. So about the viruses and about bacteria. And so you have a better understanding of kind of how those are different. Viruses are not living because they don't meet those 6 characteristics of what defines something to be a living organism. There's a concept in your textbook that talks about open systems. And so open systems are where we have an interaction with our environment. And so cells are open systems. They don't seem open because they're closed, but they are interacting and reacting and getting energy and nutrients and things from their environment, from everything around us. So we're an open system because we're eating and breathing all the stuff around us and we're interacting with our environment. There's a crash course video I'd like you guys to watch about plant cells as well as animal cells, but this is the link for the animal cell video. Okay. Typically, I would explain the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but it is a concept that you'll learn about in Bio 20. And just to make your lives a little easier, I won't really spend too much time on it. But this term prokaryotes is used for very primitive, basic cells that don't have what we call a nuclear or a membrane-bound nucleus. So their nucleus, which is kind of the brain of the cell, is free floating. And so they're very basic. They're primitive. Okay. Eukaryotes, you and I are eukaryotes, and these are more complex cells, and so they have things like mitochondria, and they have a membrane-bound nucleus, and so they're just more complex, more evolved cells, but both living, and both meet those 6 characteristics. So there are cell structures, and there is a list of all the different organelles in your textbook that I would like you guys to copy. So an organelle is a term used for the components of a cell. And so, let's see if I can. So again, organelles are the components inside a cell, and a cell is the basic unit of life. So I'm going to go over these structures, and hopefully after watching a series of videos and looking through your textbook, it'll make a lot more sense. So the very outer part of a cell is called the cell membrane. It's a semi-permeable membrane. So what that means is permeable means that things can flow through it, semi meaning some things. And so based on typically the size of the material, some things can go in and out of a cell through the membrane. Think of it like a fortress or a wall. And so if you look up here, this is showing you an animal cell and then a plant cell. And so the very exterior, almost like our skin, is considered the cell membrane. There is then fluid inside the cell, and so it kind of holds all the organelles, the structures within a cell, in place. There's also some nutrients and filaments inside what we call the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm is the fluid inside a cell. Then inside the cell, one of the main organelles is the nucleus. So the nucleus, you might have heard of it described as the brain of the cell in grade 8. And so the nucleus is where all the DNA, all the information to make new cells is stored. And it's kind of like, it's like the White House, okay, of a country. It has absolutely everything there, all the important information. And so it's the brain, okay? Then we have what are called ribosomes. And so ribosomes are small, little circular, you'll see them, I can point them out later. But what they do is they're just protein builders. So they're kind of like workers within the cell, and they're doing lots of work. The work that they're doing is building more DNA or replicating DNA so you can make more cells. And so ribosomes are there as kind of protein builders. And you and I are made up of protein. Everything in our bodies needs protein in order to do work, so protein is very important. Then we have endoplasmic reticulum. There's 2 kinds. So we have our nucleus kind of in the middle of the cell, and it's this purple structure here. And so that's where all our DNA is and all the information that we need. And so the very initial part, right outside the nucleus, is called the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And so it's called rough endoplasmic reticulum because it has a bunch of ribosomes throughout. And those ribosomes are there to help start creating and replicating DNA. So in our rough endoplasmic reticulum, where you can see all these little dots, all these little bumps of ribosomes, that's where we're having DNA replication occur, which is really important, so we can make new cells. Then as we get further away from the nucleus, we have this smooth endoplasmic reticulum, or also known as smooth ER. And so this is more of a storage facility for the cell. This is where we're going to store all our DNA, and we're going to wait to move it around and transport different things. So we have our nucleus in the center, and then we have rough endoplasmic reticulum where there are ribosomes making DNA, and then we have our smooth ER where we have the storage of that DNA. Then we have mitochondria, the mighty mitochondria. So mitochondria is throughout our body, specifically or a lot in our muscles, in our muscle tissue. And mitochondria actually takes sugar and the food that we eat, and it converts it to energy. So it is what allows us to grow and develop and exercise and do all this work and do these crazy things. It's because of mitochondria. If we didn't have mitochondria, then we would be very basic, primitive prokaryotes, those basic cells. We wouldn't be growing and developing the way that we are. So mitochondria are these very important cells. They're called also the powerhouse of the cell, because this is where we're getting all our energy, and this is where we're able to do work. And so this is also where the process of cellular respiration occurs, which we'll talk about later. And so cellular respiration is where we take that sugar, that energy that we're eating, that food, and we're breaking it up and then getting energy in order for our muscles to contract and for our body to do work. So mighty mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. This is where cellular respiration takes place. And this is where we get the breakdown of foods that we eat, sugars that we need, and we get energy. Okay. Centrioles are kind of unique. They're only present when the cell is about to divide. And so they kind of help in the process of mitosis and meiosis, which you would have learned about in grade 9. So you might see them depending on if you're Googling some images of a cell and the structures within it. You might see centrioles there, or you might not. It really depends if the artist of that image wanted to incorporate them. If you had a real life image of a cell dividing or just about to divide, then you would see those centrioles there, and they help kind of move the DNA and split the cell. So they are very important. Golgi apparatus, I'd like you to think of this as kind of like your post office. So the Golgi apparatus gathers and collects materials and molecules and information, and it creates these nice little packages of all that stuff, and it packages them into what we call vesicles. And so think of this kind of as like a winding system of a packaging system. And then at the end of the system, you get these nice packages called vesicles. And so the Golgi apparatus is kind of like your post office. It receives packages and then kind of takes care of them, and it also makes packages and then sends them off. So that's all information, material, nutrients that the cell needs. Okay. Here are the vesicles. So the vesicles are like these nice packages of material, of hormones or waste or information or DNA. And so they're all going to be housed in these nice little capsules. Then we have a vacuole. So a vacuole is unique because it's only found it's found in both plant and animal cells, but it is very large in plant cells. So I'll scroll up and show you. So a vacuole, you can see here, it's this large blue structure, and it's very large, and there's typically only one in plant cells because it helps store a lot of the fluids and nutrients and water. And so plants are not always, they're not able to go grab water whenever they want. So it's kind of a really good insurance policy to have a lot of stored water. And so they store a lot of this water and these nutrients and fluids in these vacuoles. And so they typically have one large one per cell. Whereas animal cells, we do still have vacuoles, but they are very small and there's a few of them. Okay. So they're kind of evenly distributed throughout the cell, and they're small little sacs that have fluid and water within them. Okay, and they store lots of nutrients. So it's for they store food and nutrients, and they also have some waste products in there. Then lysosomes. So lysosomes are found in animal cells only. And so lysosomes are cool because they go around and they kind of break down any stuff that we don't need anymore. So they're kind of like they digest garbage within our cells. So they're the cleaning crew. Then a cell wall. So a cell wall is something that's only found in a plant cell. And so a cell wall is actually made up of cellulose. So it's a type of sugar. It's more complex. The reason you and I don't eat grass or bark is because we can't digest it. And the reason we can't digest it is because we can't break down cellulose. And so cellulose is what makes up this exterior wall. So it's like a second wall for plant cells. And that's because plants are out in the environment and they have to fend for themselves. So they have to be very strong and sturdy. And so by having that additional wall just outside the cell membrane, that cell wall protects the plant. And it's made up of cellulose, which is a type of sugar. Another organelle that only plants have, so plants only have a cell wall, or plants are the only ones to have a cell wall, and they're also the only ones to have chloroplasts. And so chloroplasts are these green cells, and this is where photosynthesis takes place. So this is where the plant produces its own sugars, its own food. So plants are what we call autotrophs, and so they have to make their own food. And they do that by taking solar energy, and converting that, as well as water and carbon dioxide, into sugar. Okay? And so that sugar then moves throughout the plant and it does work for them. And so that process of photosynthesis is occurring specifically in this organelle, in chloroplasts. And they're green because there's a pigment inside there called chlorophyll. So we'll talk about photosynthesis and cellular respiration more later on in the unit. And so photosynthesis is occurring in chloroplasts, and only plants have them. This slide kind of gives you a comparison because it jumped back and forth a little bit. So animal cells have no cell wall, but plants do, because plants have that cellulose wall in order to protect them from the environment. Animal cells, you might have seen or noticed in that first image, they're round or irregular in shape, whereas plant cells are typically rectangular or square in shape. And that's because of that cell wall, providing them a more rigid structure. Animal cells don't have chloroplasts. You and I are not green, but plants do. And then also animal cells, I mentioned, have really small and a few vacuoles, whereas a plant cell will have a large singular vacuole. Okay, so there are quite a few videos that I'd like you guys to watch this week, but that's your lesson. Show up for the Google Meet. Please come with questions, and have a good one. Bye.